Good morning, Ebenezer family and friends. We welcome you today on Ebenezer United Church of Christ's Mental Health Sunday. Today, Ebenezer is hosting our second annual WISE Fair. WISE. Welcome, inclusive, supportive, and engaged about and for mental health. We'd like to thank our financial sponsor, Thrivent Financial, for their help in today's event. And we also hope that you're going to gain some new insights today on the topic of mental health, as well as meeting new friends. Our vendors today, RCS, Mental Health Lakeshore, Dogs to Dog Tags, The Gathering Place, Rogers Behavioral Health, and Rainbow Kids are all ready to talk with each of you about what their organizations do and how you might be able to help them educate our community about mental health. Today we are blessed to have two members of Ebenezer share their stories of lived experience. Our first speaker, Darryl Gumm, has been an active member of Ebenezer for 36 years. Born in Sheboygan and residing in Kohler with his wife Phyllis, Darryl is also very active in his community. For over 40 years, Darryl has been raising scholarship money with and for the United Church men and women. Through these efforts, the United Church men and women have been able to award annual scholarships for a person involved in religious studies. Over 25 years ago, Darryl was part of the spark that ignited the Above and Beyond Children's Museum in Sheboygan, a non-profit organization that provides a positive learning environment with interactive programs and captivating exhibits that exceed children's wildest dreams and imagination. A special place for children and their families where play and education connect through exploration and discovery. Darryl also has been actively involved in peace. Yes, P-E-A-C-E, peace. As a published author of published expressions of life and treasured memories, Darryl founded a website, www.beaninstrumentofpeace.com, and shares his insights there on everything from marriage to Christmas, and reminds us what we can do to actively promote peace in our community. Darryl also has a connection with the Friends of Peace Park, located right next to Lake Michigan in Sheboygan. He organized multiple performers to supply music after the 4th of July parade this year at the Peace House across from that park. Though not by profession, Darryl has always been a teacher. He has shown his Ebenezer family how to be more inclusive and accepting of all people, all types, all education levels, all colors, all people. His insights into Ebenezer becoming a wise congregation have been instrumental in our becoming more vocal about wise in our community. Friends, please help me welcome Mr. Darryl Gumm.
Thank you, Sue. 35 years ago, a friend of mine from my high school days suffered a nervous breakdown. I had no idea how to be present for this friend except to listen. As a result of our multiple visits, I wrote several expressions which I added to my second edition of my Expressions of Life. One of the challenges we sometimes experience in feeling obligated to return a favor of people being present for us. That's why I wrote the expression entitled, Just Being a Friend. Being there to help and asking nothing in return. Just being a friend. listening to the fears, worries, frustration, and anger that sometimes make life tough, just being a friend. Celebrating and rejoicing for the joys and accomplishments, just being a friend. Sharing excitement when excitement is there, just being a friend. Lifting up when the feeling is down, just being a friend. Helping to make things go when everything seems to be stopping, just being a friend. Showing that life really does matter, just being a friend. Being there to help and asking nothing in return, just being a friend. The last time I checked, that friend is surviving, but not necessarily thriving. 30 years ago, my younger son suffered childhood trauma at the hands of a yet-to-be-identified perpetrator. It wasn't until 20 years later that he shared that experience with his parents. By that time, he was suffering from severe depression and anxiety. His marriage had failed, and it was difficult for him to stay employed for more than a year or two. My son's childhood trauma taught me how being present is the best present we can give, especially to those who are trying to thrive in spite of mental health challenges. Nobody prepared me for the day when my son told me about his childhood trauma. I had no idea how to help him. So I reached out to people much smarter than me, including one of the best therapists in the Fox Valley for him, and one of the best therapists in our community for me. What I learned from these amazing professionals was how to be present for my son and for others in my life while taking care of my mental and physical health. I also learned how mental health challenges need to be addressed and managed, just like physical health challenges need to be addressed and managed. My son is a survivor, and as long as he addresses and manages his depression and anxiety, he not only survives, but he thrives. Sometimes being present only requires us to be physically present. Other times it requires us to completely step out of our comfort zones as we provide that presence in the form of conversation, a healing stone, a card, a letter, an email, a text, a phone call, listening, singing, writing, holding someone's hand, putting ourselves in their position, and imagining what it might be like to be them. Sometimes it is a simple gesture that takes very little time and effort. Other times it requires a significant amount of time and energy to be present. Presents come in all shapes and sizes. They do not all fit the needs of everyone all of the time. And that can be really challenging for us who seek to be present. Life is a gift. It's not always perfect. In fact, it rarely is. Likewise, our presence is not always perfect, but that should not keep us from showing up and persistently trying. It might surprise us to learn that what we might feel is an insignificant gesture is hugely important to the recipient of our imperfect efforts to be present. 25 years ago, when my father was dying, I made an audio tape for my mom and dad consisting of me reading some of the expressions from my expressions of life, as well as their grandchildren singing in children's choirs and school concerts. I brought these tapes and a tape player to my dad's hospital room, and my mom told me how much they listened to those tapes often. Since that time, I have repeated that for others who find themselves in the need of the presence, of the present of presence. Recently, I took my laptop to my sister's room and treated her to some of the music her choir used to sing. After that, we sang a couple of songs from our childhood. 10 years ago, I met an amazing community leader who taught me a thing or two about being present. From 2009 to 2017, a free community meal prepared and served at First Congregational United Church of Christ in Sheboygan was named after Seal DePrey. Seal was the facilitator, chef, and volunteer recruiter for Seal's meal, and it was organized in much the same way as the community meals served at her beloved St. Benedict's Church, Catholic Church in Milwaukee, where she lived before retiring to Sheboygan. Seal's purpose in life has been to be present for people, no matter who they are or where they are on life's journey. She now resides at Azura Memory Care in Sheboygan, and even though her life has become very challenging, she is still trying to be present for residents there who have more challenges than hers. While writing a book with Seal entitled Treasured Memories, she handed me a newspaper article with examples of how legendary football coach Vince Lombardi was present for his gay brother and his black football players. R. Ryman of Gannett News wrote, Lombardi was notable for his intolerance of bigotry. He famously informed Green Bay business owners that if black players were not welcome in their establishments, then those businesses would be off limits to all Packer players. He ignored the NFL's unofficial quota on black players, and he made it clear to players that he would not tolerate racism in the locker room. Roommate assignments were integrated well ahead of the rest of the league. Lombardi also backed players who were in interracial relationships. Just as Lombardi was ahead of his time on issues of race, he was even more ahead of the curve on LGBTQ plus issues. Lombardi had a brother who was gay, and he warned his coaches that if they made disparaging remarks about gay players, they would be looking for a new job. When he coached in Washington in 1969, his assistant general manager and the team's public relations director were both gay. Richard Nichols, a lifelong partner of Lombardi's younger brother Hal, said, and I quote, Vin was always fair in how he treated everybody. A great man who accepted people at face value for what they were and did not judge anybody. He just wanted them to do the job. End of quote. Today we live in a culture that is increasingly cruel to people who do not fit into its definition of those who are worthy of human dignity and respect because of their race, sex, ethnic background, gender identity, sexual orientation, who they love, and their social status. The only presence they experience consists of oppression and discrimination. More than ever, whether we are a famous football coach or live a less public life, we need to be positively present for those rejected by some religions, some political leaders, and some of our fellow citizens. Several weeks ago, I saw an anonymous statement on Facebook, which read, "Too often we underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have the potential to turn a life around." The reason I was able to write and present this message to you today is because of people, including my church family here at Ebenezer and my immediate family, who have been present for me throughout my life. I wrote an expression about these people, and it is called reflections. Reflections, that is what I see. Reflections of people who give me the energy and enthusiasm to start a new day. Reflections of accomplishments which were inspired because of people who touched my life with theirs. Reflections, that is what I see. Reflections of lessons learned from experiences shared by people who opened their hearts to me. Reflections, that's what I see. Reflections of special moments, shared and cherished, and friendships and caring and love. Reflections, I've seen you there in the years gone by. Thank you for being in my reflections, and thank you for being present. Blessings and peace to all of you as you seek to be present. Our next speaker is Cathy Lucchesi. She was born and raised in Northfield, Vermont. After graduation from Mount Holyoke College in 1968, she married Richard Butler and moved to Wisconsin, relocating to the Sheboygan area in 1977. Rick and Cathy had 2 children, Barbara Butler Serschel and Richard Butler, and have 3 grandsons. After her divorce, Cathy married Ed Lucchesi in 1970 and inherited 3 more adult children and 4 granddaughters. Since moving to Wisconsin, Cathy had a number of office positions, including office manager for several businesses she and Rick owned. Most recently, she was the bookkeeper and office manager for the animal clinic on Calumet Drive for 23 years, retiring in 2013. Cathy was Ed's caregiver for 10 or so years as Alzheimer's slowly took away much of the man she married. He died from it in 2018. These days, Cathy enjoys spending time with family and friends, walking along Lake Michigan, taking nature photos, and reading. I am honored to introduce to you Cathy Lucchesi.
Thank you, Darryl. You gave us many words to think about. Good morning. As Darryl said, I'm Cathy Lucchesi, and I've been a member of Ebenezer United Church of Christ for 12 years. My interest in mental health probably started in college, as when I was growing up, even with parents in the medical field, family mental health issues were not discussed, and feelings were kept hidden. I later found out that my grandfather died due to dementia, probably Alzheimer's, but I had to learn that from extended family members because it was something that was an embarrassment never to be mentioned by my parents or even to their own children. I became a psychology major thinking it would be useful as I intended to go into nursing. That didn't happen because I got married, but the knowledge still made me interested in how people's minds work. While I was married to Rick, it became obvious that my father-in-law had Alzheimer's disease. But once again, I was part of a family who refused to recognize there were any mental health problems until they became so severe that there was no denying them. Because for many years, Mom Butler spent all her time trying to hide Dad's problems. She didn't get any help for herself or her family. That would have been admitting that there was something mentally wrong with her husband, which would have been very embarrassing for her. My first husband wasn't a churchgoer, but after he left, I began attending St. Paul's UCC as it wasn't far from my house and as the denomination I grew up in. I made friends and became close to their minister, Reverend Dave Taylor, who was the one who married my second husband, Ed Lucchesi, and me in 1990. Unfortunately for us, Reverend Taylor eventually moved to a different church, and St. Paul's struggled to find a new pastor. By that time, I had learned that Ed had mild cognitive impairments, which too soon became full-blown Alzheimer's disease. I had begun to see the all-too-familiar signs I'd seen in Dad Butler, so took Ed for testing, and eventually he was prescribed medications to help slow the inevitable decline in the progression of the disease. I realized I needed more support on this journey and had not yet found the community resources that are now available to families of Alzheimer's patients. So I began to look for a more stable church family. My children already belonged to Ebenezer, as Barb's husband, Steve Scherzel, and his family had been here for generations, and my son Rick and Colleen, his wife, followed. Thus, I visited many times for family weddings, baptisms, Christmas pageants, and other church events, and always felt welcomed. We really liked Reverend Maliff, and later Reverend Laurie, and already knew some members who had previously transferred from St. Paul's, or who belonged to the Shrine Animal Unit Ed belonged to. So the decision to move to Ebenezer was an easy one. With Ed's diagnosis and growing challenges, we had already felt the pain of having former friends avoid us, presumably because Ed was different, and they didn't know what to say to either of us. So they just avoided us. It was so comforting to get such a wonderful welcome here at Ebenezer. Reverend Maliff would chat with Ed about packages of the family or other familiar topics that he would, just like he would with anyone else. When Ed wandered into a Sunday school class one morning and sat down, the teacher didn't make a big deal and just let him stay and listen. Or when Ed disappeared other times, several fellows willingly checked men's room for me without a fuss. When I left him in Comma Cafe, when I had choir rehearsals, members included him in chats over coffee and treats. He was accepted as he was, and I wasn't made to feel embarrassed. Even later in his life, when I was forced to put him in assisted living, when I could no longer care for him alone, Darryl and other Ebenezer members visited and brought CDs they thought he would enjoy or just chatted, even when Ed couldn't keep up his side of the conversation. It was so different from similar occurrences earlier in my life with my former father-in-law. For as long as I have been coming here, Ebenezer has made it a priority to be very welcoming to all. Our church bulletins all say, no matter where you are, who you are, or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. When this was originally written, I believe members were basically thinking about physical and social differences. But in January of 2021, Ebenezer also voted to become a wise congregation for mental health for all with mental health challenges and their loved ones. We will continue to be a welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged, wise congregation for mental health. I have experienced this welcome and hope all visitors to Ebenezer United Church of Christ will continue to feel this welcome as well. Thank you so much for being here.
Our final speaker today is another Ebenezer member. Born and raised in Sheboygan, Jen Colber continues to live in Sheboygan with her husband of 21 years, Tony. They have 3 children, 2 of them now in college. We at Ebenezer feel blessed to have Jen in our midst. Her personality is a blast of sunshine coming at you any day of the week. Her unintentional way of setting an example, not only for her own family, but for her Ebenezer family, in the pursuit of her own higher education, is just one small way that Jenny shows her strength and resilience. As Jenny explains it, I did not come from a family of means, which meant college was not a thought I entertained. I went into the workforce right after high school and worked a string of jobs over the course of 20 years. But one thing I always longed for was a career with a college degree. Through a strange series of events in my late 30s, I found myself deciding to go back to school and into the field of nursing. I graduated with my associate degree in nursing in 2020 and was fortunate to begin my nursing career in the field of my choice, mental health. While continuing her education, Jen worked full-time on the inpatient unit at the local hospital. At the close of 2021, Jen transitioned into a full-time position working with adolescents struggling with mental health concerns. In October of this year, Jenny will graduate with a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing. But she's not stopping there. In 2023, Jen's plan is to become board certified in psychiatric nursing. In her spare time, Jen is involved with and enjoys carpooling her high school daughter and her daughter's friends to events. Jen hosts a monthly game night, loves to take walks with her husband, and she also loves to read. She stands firm in her belief that it is never too late to evaluate your life, reflect on your bad decisions or mistakes, grow and learn from them, and find new passion and hope in this world. Friends, help me welcome our own personal ray of sunshine, Jen Kober.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen Kober and I'm an adolescent psychiatric nurse, and I love it. One of my duties is to educate adolescent patients on the physiological effects of mental health. Before I get into the discussion of actual mental health, I wanted to share something personal about me. I suffer from generalized anxiety disorder. I was diagnosed about a year ago, but I've probably been suffering with this my whole life. Imagine being 7 years old and you're carefree and riding your bikes and playing in the grass with your friends. Now I want you to close your eyes and imagine a different 7-year-old who is under her covers night after night, all night long, rehearsing spelling lists and math problems because you want to get it right, so you do it over and over and over again. Can you say obsessive? The lack of sleep, the determination, these all come with anxiety. Now, I'd like to start out with this because I feel it's important for people to understand that I come from a real personal experience with mental health issues. The minute I say I have generalized anxiety disorder, I will be dismissed by certain members of the population. We've all experienced this, the stigma that comes with understanding you have a mental health disorder. But for me, I prefer to be open and honest and say this is where I'm coming from a real place of concern and care and understanding. I'd like to first discuss the physiological factors of mental health, especially with the patients I work with, because when we learn about brain functionality, it makes it easier to understand. There are so many things we don't yet know about the brain, and they're discovering them daily. You know, if you go to a doctor's office and you get diagnosed with, let's say, heart disease, they can do a scan. They can clear out those clogged arteries. Maybe they're prescribing you some medication, asking you to reduce your sodium intake, and giving you some exercise tips. The brain doesn't work that way, okay? It has multifaceted levels where you have to do a lot of trial and error with your doctor, your psychiatrist, and your therapist before you're able to properly be diagnosed and then treated effectively. So when we talk about the brain, and I like to teach my patients about the different parts of the brain, I keep things pretty simple, mostly because when I was in nursing school, that's how I was able to remember things, and I like to think that if I can remember things this way, maybe it's easier for other people to understand too. The two parts of the brain that I'd like to discuss today are the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex is located right here, behind the forehead, and we like to talk about it as our thinking brain. It helps us to determine right from wrong, make decisions, follow directions, and set goals. This isn't fully developed in most people until they're about 25, so it makes sense why teenagers and young adults sometimes make poor choices. That brain is still getting ready to be an adult. So somewhere in the middle, kind of back here, is called the amygdala. Now, I don't have a PhD in neurology. I'm not going to get into all of those things, but I'm just kind of telling you what I understand. I like to joke with my patients that we call it the Amy G. Dalla because it helps them to remember the name. And it also helps their spelling, which I find important. As a matter of fact, I was talking to my friend about my speech last week, just getting some tips, and I told her this, and the next morning she texted me, Jen, do you want to know what I can't get out of my head? Capital letters, Amy G. Dalla. So my theory about making serious topics silly does tend to help them stick. The amygdala has a very important job. Its job is to recognize where there is danger in our lives. So if I'm in the woods and there's a bear or there's a wolf, I want that amygdala to be on point. The amygdala then sends a signal and to the adrenal glands, which are located right above the kidneys. And they create a response to pump your body full of adrenaline and then that really important stress hormone cortisol. Because you're getting to run or fight. There's a very physical response that comes with this as well. Once certain organs are hit with these hormones, they have their own set of responsibilities. The eyes become much more focused, almost like tunnel vision. You start to sweat because the sweat glands have been signaled to reduce the water in your body so that your digestive tract doesn't have to work as hard as it needs to normally. This also means you might start to feel kind of nauseous. Your heart starts to race and pump faster, so your body can have blood pumping through the veins as fast as possible. And then it's also signaling your lungs to breathe faster, because your lungs recognize you need to breathe faster to get in more oxygen, to send oxygenated blood to the vessels, so that you have the best chance of survival. Also, the amygdala shuts down the prefrontal cortex when it's activated. That no longer wants you making decisions. So it's basically saying, nope, I got this. Guys, I might be too old, but do you remember in the 90s when you used to say, don't talk to the hand? That's kind of what the amygdala does to the prefrontal cortex when it's activated. Now, we need this response. It's a great response. But what happens with mental health disorders, especially generalized anxiety disorder, it's nonstop. It's over and it's over and it's over again. You have panic attacks nonstop with no real danger lurking around the corner. Our prefrontal cortex, therefore, is shut down so much it can't help us to make the right decision, so we don't even understand what's going on. So when we have a friend that says, dude, I know how to help you. Just take this pill. Come on to the bar and take a shot. Come back to my apartment, let's go smoke a joint. You're going to say yes, even though your prefrontal cortex is like, no, what are you doing? Because it doesn't have the functionality it normally should, because you're constantly in that state of fight or flight. This is also, by the way, why mental health disorders and addiction sometimes go so strongly hand in hand. Now you might be thinking, who cares? Why is she even talking about the brain and its functions? I didn't come here to attend health class. Isn't she supposed to be giving us some heartfelt story about how it's our duty as Christians in the 21st century to be more kind to others and accepting of anybody with mental health conditions? Well, technically, yes. But I'm a firm believer that if you can understand where something begins and why it's happening, and why someone might be responding or acting in a way you don't get, you might think is inappropriate or maybe over the top, you might have a stronger inkling to just simply be kind, because now you understand, oh, they got something going on inside. Our brain is unlike any other organ in the body in that it forces other organs to react in certain ways. Other organs of the body have one function, and regardless of what's happening to any of their organ neighbors, everywhere in the body, it's going to continue to complete that one duty, one responsibility. The brain, however, can elicit responses for other organs to then overperform when it's activated. It therefore makes sense that if someone's in a mental health crisis related to their brain having some difficulty, other organs are going to have difficulty as well. And then, when the prefrontal cortex isn't making the right decisions for you, you're making bad decisions, which is also further exacerbating the problems you're having in certain areas of your body. When we can see the link between the physiological changes of the brain related to mental illness, to how it is creating the body to react, and then combine it with maybe some outbursts, personality changes, or oddly displayed behaviors that accompany these changes in the brain, a light switch can go off in our heads. Going back to that heart disease example, the person suffering before receiving treatment for heart disease had a whole list of symptoms that the doctor had to use, right? Maybe they were having chest pain, difficulty performing physical tasks, very simple daily life stuff. Be maybe irritable or moody. Maybe they have heartburn or headaches. When we connect the dots about the symptoms to a disease, which is all part of the diagnosis, by the way, which doctors use, this can then link our ability to reach out in a more understanding, compassionate way. So the question then really becomes, what can we do to help someone suffering from mental illness? It comes back to that K word, kindness. You might say, sure, Jen, it's easy for you to reach out. You literally work in this field. Well, yeah, but you don't have to totally understand what's happening in another person's life or in their health in order to simply be kind to them. As Christians, we have an obligation to support all of God's people, not just those that we can easily relate to. It takes an incredibly small amount of effort to extend kindness to another person. And if that kindness turns into a friendship, and then that friendship can turn into a trust, that person that so desperately needs help may turn to you for that support. This provides an opportunity for you to then get the help the person needs, whether it's getting them into a support group, getting them to a doctor's appointment, or encouraging them to go to therapy. For me, with my anxiety, it took a very close friend who I trusted to recognize my symptoms and take me aside and say, enough is enough. You need to go see your doctor. This is not okay. That friend was very kind to me and helped me ease my fears of having to tell my doctor my symptoms and the things that I was going through. Because even though I'm a medical professional and I understand this stuff, I also understand the stigma that comes with this and the shame that we sometimes feel when we have something going on in our brains that we don't understand. As a church, being involved in this way for the surrounding community is imperative, especially in the world's climate today. The WISE team here at Ebenezer is opening those doors, extending those hands into the community. They're reaching out with kindness, with compassion. They are saying we are a safe place to talk about the hard stuff. There's no judgment. There's only care and concern. Thank you for your time, and may God bless you.